Hello, everybody. We are live. And let's just not talk about that intro because we love it so much. But every time we're like, oh,
I
and
was
now I still
literally
did.
controlling myself. We're talking about it now by not talking about it, but I was
I
controlling
know.
myself not to say anything because I'm sitting here just like I have this like very slight headache. We talked about it a little bit earlier, and that was just a nice soothing intro into it. It made me
Exactly.
feel a little bit better.
Exactly. And we have already the first guest. Hello, Romina. Welcome for joining. Welcome to join. Do we have this on Apple? Is
Hey,
my mic?
Alexander.
No, I turned it off.
Yeah, it's all good.
Oh boy, we have Alex in the house. Dude, I'm going to see you next week in Amsterdam. How are you? Welcome. So Alex is actually working with Nuxt,
Hmm.
and so you're in an Astro stream, dude.
Astro. Yeah.
Anyways, we're just bantering. That's how we start these streams. We like this.
My favorite part
Um,
is we got next person in the audience. Not only are we working in Astro, but when we do our front end for it, we're gonna be doing React. So it's like completely like
oh yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so Alex is going to be Astro and React. Brave yourself.
Yeah.
Anyways, so like we were just saying, we are going to have a look at if you build a blog and you have a lot of posts, you tend to want to not load everything in one go. Even though Hygraph is fast enough to do it, it might not be the best thing to do for your user experience. And who we have here? It's React with Astro. Yeah, exactly. We're going to do that. And so essentially what we'll be doing is we're going to use Astro 4, the new version, and Hygraph with GraphQL. And so the very interesting bit here is how to figure out pagination, load more, things like that with GraphQL and Astro and React with island architecture. I think I've
In,
said all the things now.
in
Have I?
fairness, I didn't actually run my upgrade script yesterday, so we're not using Astro 4, but it's fine.
Ah,
It's all like this part of it is all backwards compatible. It's not a big deal. We're not using any of the fancy features in Astro 4.
all right. So we're
At
still
some
good.
point, I should upgrade this demo into Astro 4, but it all works out. In fact, why don't I kind of show what we're working with here?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So the fun part about this, the backstory here, and there's some other content we'll share about this as well, so you can kind of like see it in other ways. But I made this demo last year, actually around this time, maybe a little bit later,
Mm.
when a certain social media platform was going through a time of trouble, and many developers were fleeing said platform, which will remain nameless for the moment. But it's a micro blogging platform, right?
Oh yeah, crap, you're right.
So I was trying to like capture the zeitgeist and like talk about what was happening. But I made like a micro blog using Hygraph.
So
And
before you go on, isn't it the everything platform now, though?
I don't want to talk about it, Tim. It makes me too
I'm
sad.
just
It makes
kidding.
me too sad. A
Anyways,
platform that I'm still a part of, and
same
yeah,
keys.
yeah, all sorts of stuff makes me sad. Um, anyway, microblog, short blog posts, things that you write in perhaps under 240 characters, perhaps not, because it's your platform. It was kind of this zeitgeist of like own your own space, right? Which I still
Hmm.
fully support. Like, honestly, if I wanted to like blow this out, I would make this also have maybe an API route in it that when you post could actually like trigger and like post to other platforms. There's a lot of cool stuff that you could do with it. None of that is important for today. None of it is baked into this as it
Mhm.
stands. But we have a starting point for the code and we have an ending point. So right now, what we've already gotten to is displaying all the posts that I currently have in Hygraph on the homepage of my microblog. There's only 7 posts. That number isn't dynamically generated. That's actually just an H1 inside of Hygraph's rich text, just so we can kind of
Wow,
see the
really?
ordering of things. But what we want is this to be expandable, right? We want this to go forward and be able to handle hundreds of posts. So one of the
Exactly.
things that we have to be aware of when you're using almost any system, but specifically Hygraph, is when you're querying your content, we actually do have a top limit on how many you can get at a time, because we want to protect our user base when we can, right? If you query 1,000 posts in a front end script, that's going to be slow and a problem. So we max it out at 100. By default, the query, which we'll look at here in a second, starts at 10. But what we want is for a certain number of posts, like here we have 3 posts, we want like a load more button, right? So when I click that, Astro is going to go fetch more posts. And this also makes the
Mhm.
initial load time much, much quicker. We don't have to pull data from 100 posts. We pull 3, and that makes the load faster. Those first 3, and again, this goes into the power of Astro. This page is static HTML. And then we hydrate that load more button to have front end functionality. And then when that click happens, that's when we fire the query to go get more content. So when we're doing this, we're not querying a huge JSON and then only showing 3. We're only showing 3 and then allowing the user to opt in when they want to select more, which is I think a much better kind of pattern and what Astro's Islands architecture really gets into in a lot of ways. All make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the exciting bit. I love because I'm old school. I come from the time when we didn't have that much JavaScript, but it's
Yeah.
all server side stuff, right? But then it wasn't fast because it was whatever, some PHP with SQL, you know?
Yep.
And so then we moved into this like I love the complicated combination of having static stuff that you then hydrate and do stuff with. And that's also probably why I like Nuxt so much, because that's completely native to Nuxt.
Yeah.
And now Astro is doing it in a slightly different way. Nux is like catching up again. It's like this whole, a party.
The frameworks,
This-
as much as there's competition, right? That competition breeds creativity, and we get the best parts of
Exactly.
each framework kind of getting shared in a lot of
Yeah,
ways. Hopefully, not the worst
exactly.
parts, and we sometimes see that too, though.
We have seen a bit of that, but that's not for today, is it?
Exactly, not the topic of conversation for today. So yeah, we can maybe even dive into code here in a second, but just kind of show things off real fast. This is all within Hygraph. All these posts are what's in there. When you dive in to edit one of these, you can see the actual, 6, that number I mentioned, is just a header.
Oh, you just hard typed it like that. That's fine.
Because again, when I was working on this and kind of showing it off originally, I needed to, like, in the content that I made around it before, one of the things you also have to think about when you're making the query, and I'll show that,
Mm.
is you don't want it to be ordered by the original date, right? So actually one of the things we've got, and this is in my index.astro, is when we actually query the posts, we're actually ordering it by the created date in a descending order. So we,
Yeah.
it's that reverse chronological order. So I in the original content I had around this, we bring it in, but oh no, the old post is first. What are we going to do? We order by. And by the way,
Exactly.
all of this is built-in functionality inside of Hygraph's, native GraphQL API. So like I can go into the posts here, and you can see I can actually do that order by, select from a list of things that I can order this query by, and be good.
That's cool.
And we'll get back into the API playground. We'll craft our query inside there later on. But the first thing that we need to do is take a quick tour, right? Let's look around things. Let me hide the terminal. We don't need that. So this is the index page. You can see I've got a pages area. You can see each of my posts technically has a page as well. We don't need to really dive into that. That's just how I can have a link for each one, basic functionality.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But then the index page is where I'm waiting, and I'm getting, this is just a simple fetch request, going and looking at my Hygraph endpoint. And then I am making that query. That query's got the post order by created at date descending. I'm getting, we just did a stream on this last week, and I'm already breaking my own rules, right? I'm getting our rich text as HTML,
Do as
really
I
has to be
say.
rendering this, but that's not the purpose of this demo. So let's just do it as HTML and remove the code that could get in the way of that. And
Yeah,
then,
sure.
getting an ID, getting the slug for it, and getting that created at date as well, so that I can display it. Let's do this real fast too. I'm going to close this finished product before I start trying to make changes to it and it not going live.
Yeah, that's a good move.
Always good. But that's where this
Sorry,
date's
go on.
coming from as well.
Yeah, exactly. Now I was just wanted to
Yeah.
look at this. Like, you're not using any modules or libraries to query GraphQL here. It's literally
not.
just fetch with a post and a body.
Yep.
And that's how you can do GraphQL as
If
well.
I were making this like more extensible and making this into like something that I was actually probably going to use long term, I would use something like a GraphQL requests npm package. That's what we use in a lot of our demos. But I also like to point out, like, you don't need Apollo, you don't need GraphQL request. A fetch request with a body is all you need to do this. You post to our endpoint and you send it the query and you're good to go.
Exactly. That's nice to see. You can kind of just not go the complicated route and just do it the way you know how
Yeah,
to
and
do it.
sometimes people ask us like, "Hey, you know, do you have an SDK for your API?" With GraphQL, like, yeah, it might be nice to have an SDK for some things, like maybe mutations wise, but like
Yeah.
for querying, you don't really need it.
Yeah.
Because
I
the
could
native
imagine it
aspect
for
of it.
TypeScript though. Like if you wanted to get types and generated types from your queries or from introspection, we could potentially do that on a CLI or something. But there are packages that just do that. So, anyways,
And
we
we're,
don't
we're,
need a
we're
big
talking
system.
internally about developer tooling too. And so like CLIs come
Yeah.
up, SDKs come up, and there might be some things in the future there. But for the most part, you can get most of your needs met with either one of those, external packages or just, fetch request. And I'll say, like, as we go through this, there are lots of efficiencies that we could make in terms of the code that I have not optimized, right? I don't want to do it because I like keeping all this together so we can actually see what needs to happen and everything's kind of co-located. But yeah, so one thing that's happening here is we're actually using Astro's front matter, and every page can have front matter in a .astro file, and we're putting all these queries up here, and it is a top-level async function, right? So all of this can use awaits, and I don't have to build that into how I don't have to like make an async function. This is an async function as soon as I say await, which is super handy in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's
In fact, I'm putting await here, and then I'm putting await here because I'm doing the JSON function too. So basically what's happening here is I'm getting the data, there's a data object on that, and then I'm destructuring the posts array off of that. And then all my template has to do is loop through the posts in a map and return a component. And this component is a very, very simple component. It's post.astro, and it is just a div. Inside of it, we are getting our content in HTML, and we're setting that to the HTML of this div. Set
Oh
colon
wait,
HTML.
what is
Yeah,
this? I've never seen this before. Is this an Astro thing?
it is an Astro thing. I
Aha.
think in the view world, right, we'd call this a directive.
We can do a phi dash HTML. This is true.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the same. Okay.
And so like on this, right, in the React world, this would be where you would do like, was it underscore dangerously set inner HTML
Yes. Okay.
equals 2 brackets and then say HTML equals.
They
That's
really
fine.
don't want you to use that, don't they?
Well, and overall, you really don't want to use that in many, many ways. However, we have native HTML coming in. We want to set
Exactly.
this
So
to that.
easy, right?
Yep.
Yeah, sure.
And then we're just saying that time and putting a link directly to the post with that time. I am doing a little bit of things to actually format the time and date. I'm taking the created at date and time from Hygraph, and I'm running it through just simple date JavaScript functionality to create the date string that I want and the time string that I want. And then I am putting those here in the anchor. And that all corresponds to this, right? Friday, January 13th, 2023. It was roughly a year ago that I was working on that. Look at that.
Wow.
And there's the time that these were made at. And you can see they're all the same because I made them pretty much in one go. So yeah, that's like the absolute basics. That's where we're at. But we need to do a few things to get this ready for the dynamic issues, right, that we're going to run into. The first is we need some sort of front end for it. Astro is going to allow you to do like vanilla JS in a variety of ways. But if we want to use the Islands architecture and we want to really set these things up in a maintainable way for the future, we're probably going to run into a framework. And so I've already done this, but we need to add React to this and actually set Astro up to know what's going on with React. So if I were doing this from scratch, I'd say npx astro add React. And then Astro in the CLI that they have will actually do all the installation I need on that. And what ends up coming out of that is in the config file, it would install the Astro React package, import it here, and then add it as an integration here. And you can see I already have Tailwind in there too. That's where the styling is coming from on these.
This is so nice and easy, isn't it? It's crazy.
Yep. And when you want Tailwind, you literally run npx astro add Tailwind, and it does that for you as well. They put a lot of time and effort into the CLI, and it works really, really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what you would run. I've already done it, so we can go ahead and start using React. So the first thing that I want to do is I actually want to move away from the post, putting this native stuff in that post component in Astro. And I want to do it for a specific reason. When we get more into the architecture of things, the post body for these, the content of the post, I need to be able to use that in React as well, because we're going to be adding these dynamically later on. And I can't use an Astro component in a front-end framework. So the very first thing that I'm going to do, and I've already done it, is I need to convert the content of my post, and I'm just going to do the content, into a React component, into JSX. So you can see here I have a post content component that is very similar to my Astro component, right? As we go through it, we are getting off of the post that I'm going to pass into it, the content, the slug, and the created at date. We're going to have a date string and a time string, which we set in the front matter of the other one anyway. And then we return JSX. And you can see, hey, look, div dangerously set inner HTML equals.
There we go.
We're changing methodology here, right? We're changing framework. And then we still set a time, and we've got the anchor and all the same stuff. But now it's a React component using JSX instead of an Astro component. So let's go into our post and let's actually bring that in. So let me make sure I'm doing this the correct way. So at the top here, before anything else, because imports go at the top, we're going to import that component. Import post content from post content, right? Yeah. And then what we can do is replace all of this with the post content component. And then we'll pass into that the post object that we're getting from Hygraph, which is post. And then we don't actually need any of this JavaScript here anymore because we're doing that in the component now.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And now you have to close the bracket.
I do. Good catch on that. All right. So let's save that in. And in theory, nothing should change. Absolutely nothing should change other than actually let's prove that it worked though and say hi inside of each of these.
Yeah, just to be safe. Oh, we go.
So what Astro is doing here is it's actually there's no front-end code happening right now. This is all being rendered in the build. So this is all still HTML. There's no interactivity here yet. But we used JSX, we used this other framework to build it in our build process.
So it's essentially just using it as a templating language for now.
Exactly. Right? And you can use that with Vue, you can use it with Solid.js and a few others, right?
Yeah. Cool.
But we're setting that up so that we can use it dynamically in the front end as well. So the next thing we need to do is actually paginate our data. So we have this, we're ready to go, but we don't want all of our data coming in this query anymore. We only want a certain number of posts coming in. I'm going to set this to be about 3 because I think that with 7 posts, that gives us 3 pages worth. It gives us a little functionality. But obviously, when you've got hundreds of posts, 10, 15, like figure out what is the right ratio for that load time, right? The optimized JSON to be delivered there. And to do this, I'm actually going to move us back into Hygraph, and we're going to use the API Explorer because we're no longer going to be using this posts query anymore. What we're going to use
we're going into territory I've never used. Like, I've not seen this. I've been in Hygraph for a while, but that's just the breadth of functionality we have is sometimes hard to cover.
Yeah, and when you aren't doing, like, this is specific functionality, honestly, around pagination or around loading additional content, whether that is you have more than 100 posts and you need to do something with it, or you actually want to do pagination. Exactly. So you'll see in our query builder over here, right, in our Explorer, that posts is a query, singular post is a query, and then there are 2 other queries right next to it. So we have post version, posts, plural, and posts connection. So post is going to get you a singular singular document with an attribute, right? I'm going to search for an ID, search for a slug, and get a singular post. Post version is a query that lets you get a version of a singular document. So if I wanted to see the draft version that has a revision 5 versions ago, I can get that in that way. It's a little helper function. Posts is what we're already using. It gives me back an array default of 10 documents, but up to 100 documents. And you can do all that ordering stuff. You can specifically filter. You can also do first and last and some other stuff. And then we have this idea of posts connection. This is using what's called the relay connection specification, which is a way of doing GraphQL pagination. And what
So
this
this
does,
is an extra spec on top of the normal GraphQL spec, or is this the
yes,
way GraphQL wants you to do this, basically?
yes. And me not being a huge GraphQL nerd, I'm not in like a working group for any of this, right? That's not who I am. I'm more than content to use it and not fully know
Yeah,
why they wrote spec this way. But this is also, again, why you don't necessarily need like an SDK when you're using GraphQL if these kinds of things are baked in. So
exactly.
if I wanted to paginate and I didn't have this post connection, I could technically do that a little bit in this basic post query. I could say, give me the first 3 posts, and it would only give me, let's actually give an actual set of data here. Title, do I have a
Maybe like a
title?
title or something. Yeah.
Uh, slug,
Ah,
there we
yeah.
go. So here are the first 3,
Mhm.
right? And then I could also use this skip argument, and I could say, give me the first 3 after those first 3, and here are the next 3, right? And then if I needed to, like, I could continue adding, I could continue going. So you could build pagination functionality with that. It's not super easy, and there's a lot of functionality that once you start going down that path, you start rolling your own code for, and
Yeah, you
nobody
don't
got
want to
time
do
for that.
too much like local stuff in your front end with too much ifs and elses and loops, and we don't want to have any of that.
Absolutely. Like, you need to know, like, where the last one was, you need to know where to get the next one, you need to know, is there a next page, right?
Or how
So,
many pages, maybe
how
even.
many pages might be nice? Absolutely. Like, if you were doing, like, full pagination. We're not doing full pagination,
Exactly.
we're doing the load more. I do have a link
Yeah.
for y'all later on for that, though. So we're gonna use this posts connection query. So what that's going to give us, let's go ahead and say first, our first 3, right? And we want to have that same order by, right? Order by created at descending.
Yeah.
So what this is going to give us is additional functionality. So we had this new page info object on it. What page info is going to give us is the end cursor, the start cursor, the has next page, and has previous page. So let's look at that real fast. Let's just check to see if the page that we're on has a next page when we only are getting 3. So yes, but
Oh, that's
if we were getting the first 10, it does not have a next page. I only have
Mhm.
7 items in my array. So this builds a huge piece of functionality for us that we don't have to worry about, because we only want to display a more button if it has a next page. So that's really important. We also need to know the end cursor for each of these. What this is the ID that we can use to get the next set of information.
Okay, so a
So
cursor is to indicate to get another set of information, like a starting point of that list or something.
yeah. So what I can
I'm
do is,
literally learning as we go here. I love this, by the
yeah.
way.
So instead of using skip like we would do in the other
Mhm.
kind of methodology, what we can also do is we can do after. So after is going to take a string that is one of these cursors. So basically, in my code, one of the things I will be getting back is the end cursor, so that the next time the user clicks the get more button, we'll use the end cursor and say, give me the next 3 after the last one from the last set. Again,
Mhm.
all this is functionality that you could theoretically build in that front end, but that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Um, so we have this idea of has next and the end cursor, both of which we'll need in the end. But we also need to get our data, right? We need the actual posts as well. So alongside our page information, this is where we go into like GraphQL territory. Like, our posts query abstracts that away from you. You don't have to think about edges. You don't have to think about nodes. But
Mhm.
in this world, we're sticking to the specification because it gets so complicated so fast that going
Yeah.
edges and nodes makes a lot of sense. So the edges are each of these kind of page sets. So we can get the cursor, and we can also go into the node, and the node is where our post data lives. So
Yeah.
we'd also need, again, the slug. I think we were getting the ID before, the created at, and the HTML from the content. So now
Oh yeah, you're putting it on first 10. Maybe
Oh,
that's
I'm
it.
sorry. I also had this after blank, which
Oh,
we
we
don't
don't need
want
to
here.
make that's it. Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, we do also want, first 3. There we go. I
There
was
we
saying after blank, and it was like, hey, there's nothing after
go.
blank.
Yeah, there's nothing after blank. Exactly.
Whatever that is. And so you can see here we've got our edges. The edges are basically each of these sets will be a page, and the edges are the posts that are coming in, and then the content of that post is in the node. So we could actually
Oh,
say, good.
so I'm just learning as I go. I can see now the cursor is actually the same as the ID of the post. So it's literally just saying, this was the last post you queried. That's the ID. And so for
Well,
the
so
next one,
actually, this
look.
one and this one are different.
Yeah,
But
of course.
this one, so let's look, S1Z, right? So we come down
That's the
here,
third one, right? Yeah, there we
S1Z.
go.
Yep.
Okay, so
So
the
that's
cursor is
how we're going to tell the next query what to do.
exactly. Oh, it starts to become easier now because I was somehow thinking that a cursor ID signifies your first 3 posts as a group or something.
Yep.
But it's much easier if it's just an ID of the last thing you asked for.
Exactly. I don't need to know, the chunk. I just need to know the last item.
Exactly.
Because again, like I think in the back end, again, not being like a super big like GraphQL, person, you could do it the way you're describing it, where like the chunk has a cursor. But I think this way is more performant in the back end. Like as it's actually doing that query, you don't have to group things together. You can just like we'd have to save that. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I don't work in back end.
We don't have to get into it. This is actually quite easy for us to use now.
Yep. So this is pretty much the what we need. But I like to name things because that's just kind of who I am. So what we can actually do is we could say that instead of this post connection, I want this to be known as a page. And instead of the edges, I want this to be my posts array. And then each of these on it, instead of being called a node, could be called a post. So when we save that, our post connection is now page. Post array is now an array of posts, and each object in it has the cursor and a post. So I can actually, I don't think the correct term is casting, but I can basically cast this information under a new variable and have it available in a better human readable form. So what I can do is I can grab all of this.
It's possible. This is so cool. Sorry, I keep interrupting you because I'm excited. That's
and like the great thing is this is native GraphQL, right? This is just how GraphQL works. All of which is built into a native GraphQL API with Hygraph. So I'm going to change out my query here to be this, but we need to make a few other changes as well. We want to have these be programmable, right? I want it to actually be a variable instead. So I'm going to add a variable to my query in GraphQL called, actually, do I need cursor on this one? I do not. Yeah, I do need the cursor. Why do I need the cursor? Oh, this is on the more button. Sorry. Cheat sheets. I just need to know the size, right? We don't actually have a cursor on this one. I need to know what size for this to be, and the size needs to be an int. And then what we can do is we can actually change this out to be the first of size. And then in my query, after I add the query in this object, I can add my variables property as well, which is going to be an object that has whatever dynamic data I want, in this case, a size. I'm going to create a variable called page size. Again, this is maybe a premature optimization, but being able to change it on the fly is really nice. So we'll have a page size variable up here that is equal to an integer of 3.
This is still GraphQL native, like all of this.
Yes,
like there's no SDK for any of this.
And in many like other like packages, right? In GraphQL request or in Apollo, you'd structure this slightly differently. But when you just make a fetch request, you send it with a JSON object that has your query and your variables as properties.
Exactly. Super nice.
And then we need to make some other changes down here real fast. We need to, instead of getting the posts now from data, which is my favorite thing to do, data, we need to get the page that we are receiving.
Yeah.
Right. Because we changed the way that functioned. We now have this page variable. And then from that page variable, we need to get the posts, right? So now instead of posts, we need the post. I think I call it post array, right?
Array, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Page.posts array, and I think that will work.
That should
And
do
then
it.
we loop through that, right? And we display a post for each of them.
Yeah. To me, this is always mind-boggling with JSX or TSX, whatever this one is.
This is
That
not. This is Astro. It's its own
oh
flavor.
wait, this is Astro, but still, there's the same thing here, where somehow a map always needs to return to something, to a variable, but it's not doing that now. So
Yeah.
to me, that's always slightly, oh, we're gonna console log the.
Yeah. I changed things from how I structured it in my cheat sheet.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, never do that, right? That's a terrible idea.
So
So save that
it's about
in.
your content field.
Well, it's because it's not getting to where it needs to be. So my
Ah,
page,
right.
my page object, which is on this, so I'm getting page, has posts array, and the posts array is an array of objects.
This should do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe.
Yeah. This is also because remember we changed this up here too, right? Now the post array, each of them has the cursor and the post data. I probably should have called this post data, right, to make it a little bit more clear. Naming is one of the hardest things we do in dev.
Exactly.
So save that. No more errors. Let's get rid of the console log. And again, we should have no changes other than we should only have 3 posts.
There we go. It worked.
Yep.
Magic.
So now we need a more button, right? We need at the bottom here, only if there's a next page, display a more button. So we can do that with a conditional and a component. So to begin with, before we make a component out of this, we're just going to check to see if the page has a next page and display just a quick like H1 down there, just so we can see it. So we'll check to see if page info, which is again what keeps that information in the connection spec, has next page, which is a Boolean. It'll be true or false. If it is true, display an H1. And this is where our component will eventually go. Exactly. So we save that in, and you can see down here it's true. And if we go back and we say, give me the first 10 for our page size, we will not have that H1 at the bottom anymore because it's checking against that thing that we get from our data. Take that back to 3. All right, and here's where the fun begins. Because here's where we get into React, and here's where I hope that my React brain is functioning today. And if it's not, I have a component already built. Or if we run out of time, I have a component already built. So I'm going to create a new component that is called more button.jsx. And you can see there's a more.jsx there. That's where the other component lives.
Yeah. We'll only go there if this doesn't work.
If I fail at my job today, know that I didn't fail at my job yesterday and 10 months ago, and we can get to where we need to be.
Exactly. We're good.
So we will start by being very, very simple here. This is one big React component at this point. So we're going to export a component, and that component will be a function called more button, which will take, do I need to pass it anything? I think I need to pass it something eventually.
I think it needs the cursor, right? To know what
it will need multiple things actually. But for now, we'll just have it be like this, just so we'll get our kind of feature parity with where we exist right now.
Yeah.
And then we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff up here. Do a whole bunch of React. And then eventually we will spit back out JSX, right? So we're going to return some JSX. And to start with, let's have it return our H1, right?
Exactly.
This is the component. So we'll save that. It's nowhere yet. But what we can do is we can come into our index page. And now instead of this H1, we're going to use that component. So we need the more button, which we'll also need to import at the top. So import.
I really like the way you do this because I learn in small chunks, because this gives me overview. First simple, then you add a little bit more, then you add more. Because if you just code everything in one go and you don't know why, if it's breaking, you don't know what broke.
Exactly. And this is This is not the way that I wrote it, right? I wrote it in a very nonlinear path, but it is hopefully the good way of learning. That's at least what I've found in the past. So we
Yeah.
have a more button, but we also need to do a couple things on that more button. This will work, and it's down here, right? But let's
Yeah.
say I want to console log something, and this is kind of getting into Astro knowledge at this point. Let's say when in the browser I want to console log in the browser, right? So I'll save this. We'll open up the browser and let's refresh the page just to confirm. Nothing is happening in the console.
No.
But you might have noticed every time we load that page in the build, it is functioning as that console log. And that's because Astro thinks this is just, we just want to build HTML from this. It doesn't know that this is a client-side component.
The server. Exactly.
Yep. So we need to tell it what to do for the client. And there is what's called a client directive in Astro. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. You can do it on load. You can do it on the first idle thread. You can do it, I don't know what media does, if I'm being honest. You can do it client only so that this would not be generated in HTML.
The server. Yeah.
Which we don't have to worry about, right? Because we're doing this conditional. We're saying if the data has a next page, we need this. So I don't want it. I want that button there if it's supposed to be there. I'm going to do client visible. This will defer the loading of this component until it's using native JavaScript behind the scenes. I can't remember what the functionality is. Intersection observer.
Intersection observer.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when it hits that, right, it builds this component. It rehydrates the component. This component will exist as just a button style, right? But it will rehydrate to get this. And there's probably something to be said with the fact that I might want this to be client only because of that. Like the functionality won't actually work. I'm not going to get into that today, but that is probably the better way of doing it.
Exactly. We could have an idealistic conversation about that if needed.
Exactly. And now when we come back over, we also get it in the browser. We get it in the build step and in the browser. So we get both sides of that. In fact, I think if I said, actually, just to show something else to see, I'm kind of curious. So I reload the page, nothing's there. I scroll down, and then it fires, right? So it hydrates when it's needed, not before it's needed, which is great for performance on the front end.
I have a tiny spicy question for that.
Go for it.
Can you check how big that little JavaScript is now that Astro actually put in for this intersection observer? Because I kind of feel like maybe that's kind of a lot to put in to make that work.
That's an absolutely astute observation. Let's see. Of course,
I'm not sure we can see that because it's local host and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's loading React, and its own little island thing, and it's a hydration engine. So there must be something relatively big coming in.
Yeah, I can't. It looks like 3.1 kilobytes.
Yeah, that's. I think we're fine.
Again, this builds up, right? Like we're gonna put more this is very small basic functionality that we currently have. We're just displaying HTML, which I would never do client side anyway. So we need to do more with it to make the job worthwhile. So we're gonna do a few things, and here's where we find out if I am actually ready for this. There are better ways of handling state than what I'm going to do today, but we're going to make it as simple as possible as we go through it.
Yeah. Cool.
So what we need to do is get some React functionality rolling. So we're going to use state in React, and we need to set a few different pieces of state. You could do this in one big object. My brain on something small like this, I keep them separate. Again, I think it helps kind of in the learning process. We need a state of posts, which is also going to give us a set posts method as well. And we're going to use state. And when I hit enter on that, you can see VS Code gave me the import automatically.
That's nice.
And this is going to be an empty array to start off with, because we want our posts to be an array. We also, Tim, as you pointed out earlier, we do want the cursor, and we are going to want to dynamically set the cursor because we're going to want to update that when we click it, right? We update it to set the next cursor. So we will have a cursor state as well. And my fingers are a little cold, and we're going to use state again. And this time we're going to set a variable in our component that's going to be called current cursor. This is what we're going to pass in from where this gets loaded in. We'll set that in a second, but we'll go ahead and say up here in the props coming into this, current cursor is something that we're going to need.
Yeah.
And then we're going to also need to check if has next is a thing. And we're going to need to know about loading state as well. So we're going to set 2 more variables. Let me just copy these in, actually. That'll be faster.
Yeah, it's easier.
A lot of typing is boring for everyone. Has next,
There
has next. We're going to have that set to true by default. And then loading, set loading, false. So a couple small things that we're also going to add into our props. We need a size, and I need a default. I'm going to set a default size on this, but when we actually pass this in as a prop, it'll get overridden. I just want to put some protections in there. And then I'm going to put this in all caps. This is a weird constraint on Astro in that because this is so deep down, some of the environment variable stuff doesn't work exactly as you'd expect it to. So I have an environment variable in my page for my endpoint URL.
Yeah.
I can't actually access that here. I can't remember the exact reasoning, but I went back and forth in like a GitHub issue on it. Maybe it's fixed in 4, I don't know, but it is something that we can pass in the endpoint, right? That's not a big deal on this.
But it's running on feet, so I imagine you can do an import of that. If you go back to the page, you might be using the same there.
I am. So that's actually how we're getting it up here. It is import meta, and that, at least in this version of Astro, that does not work in the React component.
Okay, good to know.
So this was probably 3 hours of developing this demo last year. I was like, this should work. Why doesn't this work? It doesn't work.
Yeah, some sort of translation layer that just gets lost in translation, I guess.
Lost in translation. All right. So then let's see here. We need to do a little bit.
You do size equals 1 rather than :1 in an object.
This is how the prop functionality works here.
Oh, okay.
You can actually see. I think it will yell at us here if I do this, right?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm just literally learning React as we go.
Yeah, it's when to use equals versus when to use colon. Still, I get it wrong the first time almost every time, wherever I am.
I love it.
But it's because in this kind of setup, right, we're actually using the argument syntax. I don't even think this is necessarily React. The fact that we're passing in an object and then
this is a destructured one. But if it's destructured, it should still be a colon. In JavaScript, that is.
I am curious about that and whether or not that's the case. I don't actually know now that I'm thinking about it, because like it isn't in this state. We're in an argument set, and arguments typically are going to be equal to set a default value, but we are inside of an object inside of an argument. So
function. So anyways, we could go on a tangent and find out, or we can actually make this work.
Yep.
Let's just make this work. We're good. Yes.
All right. So let me see what the next piece of disclosure I want is. Let us actually get our data, right? So we're going to have a function to get our data, and that's going to be a get more function, and that's going to be an async function. And then when this starts to go, I want to set loading to be true.
Yeah.
Until the end of this, in which case I will then set loading to be false, right? And then I need to get the data from Hygraph that we need, right? So I'm going to set a response, and that's going to be an await, because we're in an async function, and we're going to fetch, again, using the native fetch API.
And now copy paste.
I'm going to copy and paste this because this is way too much typing. Paste this in. Where did I start the copy? Riveting stuff, I know. All right, const fetch. All right. So a few things that are happening here that we need to pay attention to. The endpoint is coming from our props. Again, that's that kind of weird Astro stuff that I deal with. We're going to need to create a query. And then we're going to need to set the size. The size is also coming from here. And we need to set the cursor. and why is and the cursor needs to be dynamic based on this, right? So the current cursor gets passed into my state here.
Okay, it makes sense. And so you
But
get the cursor from the state, basically. And so
absolutely.
quick question though, why are we querying from a button? Shouldn't the button ask the thing above it, hey, give me this set rather than the other set that you just
The
gave me?
thing above it is not a front end client based thing.
Yeah, it's Astro SSR.
Yep. Well,
What's the right
it is
pattern
not
here?
even SSR. It is static HTML because I'm not using SSR in this
Oh,
project.
this is true. This is true. It's
Yep.
just a renderer.
It's
Yeah,
just
okay.
straight HTML.
If this was full React, you would have a parent component with a context that you would fill with the data, and it just trickles down to all the things, right? That's what you would do.
So we're low on time, but philosophical tangent real fast, and why I
There we
actually
go.
really love the idea of islands architecture. To me, when React was created, like was it a decade ago? It's somewhere around that, right? Mid 20 teens. Sorry, Aaron.
Look at this. Please don't trigger me.
The
I'm
promise
sorry.
of React, right, was that React would be like the front end template functionality for little pieces of the web. You'd sprinkle JavaScript throughout your application, but you know what happened? React ate everything for exactly
Yep.
the reason you just said, Tim, right? The state kept having to be passed up further and further
Yep.
until it was the entire application. So
Yep.
yes, I could actually make this all one big React component. But then on that client load, when like the entire list of things loads, it would then rehydrate the whole page. It wouldn't be an island necessarily
Yeah, then
anymore.
your performance is out the door, essentially, because everything
Probably
gets
not
re-rendered.
terrible, but yeah, it's a slippery slope, we might say.
Oh yeah, because then add CSS and JS, and then you lights out, basically.
Yep. I just did
Anyway.
a quick copy and paste for my query, right? The query is pretty much identical to the index page, except for now we also have a cursor. The cursor is going to be what we use for the after. Again, that's that same functionality that we worked in the playground. We get the first size, first number, and then we're still ordering by created at descending. So we want to keep that consistent.
Okay,
And then
so
everything else is
we
pretty much
have
the same.
page info though. Okay, this makes sense. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So that's the query that is being passed in here. And then the variables are the size and the cursor that we have set here. So we have this get more function. So we need to use it in some way, right? So we're going to come down into our component. We're still going to keep this fun. This is a component piece because I'm enjoying that. But this is also now going to become a fragment, right? Because I don't actually want to add a new wrapper. A fragment is just going to put all this HTML or all this into the DOM as these pieces. Maybe at some point I want it to be in a wrapper, but for now I'm good. So let's check two quick things, right? And I'm going to copy and paste these in actually. So first, we want to check to see if we're currently loading. If we are loading, let's put a loading area. And then if we have next, we want to, or sorry, if we has next, because, naming, I want to display.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's just the former copy editor in me is just, it gets upset. So we're gonna have a button. The button has some Tailwind classes on it, and it has this on click, and the on click is the get more function that we just wrote.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
And then I think, and we'll see if this progressive disclosure methodology works here. If I save this, I think we're good, and we'll actually see both the button and the loading. Actually, we won't see the loading quite yet. But when we
list, right? Or will it?
When we click get more.
Okay. Cool. This is what I expect.
Yep. Because I'm not telling load more to go away, right? But this means that our functionality is in fact currently working in the front end. So after, let's see, scroll back up. After all of this runs on this kind of get more functionality, we need to do some cleanup work as well. So let me make sure I'm in the right spot. Let's close that. And when we get this back, we need to set set our loading to false. Oh yeah, that's the easy thing for us to do because that's going to get rid of that loading display. But we also need to do a few other things. We're getting this response back, and just like we did on the home page, we need to get the JSON, and we need to get the data off the JSON. So JSON await response. We're going to JSONify the response that we get from Hygraph. We're going to grab the data, and then we're going to split the data into a couple pieces. The pieces we need are the posts array, which is I think what we called it still, and the page info, right? And we're going to get that off of the page. I did rename that. Did I rename it here? I did not rename it here. So post connection.
Let's keep it like this. Yeah. So it works. Cool.
So we're destructuring all of that. And then what we need to do is we need to get our set posts functionality, right? That method that we got from useState. And the weird thing here is we're going to have it be an array. We're going to destructure where it currently was because we want all the posts to continue being there from before. And then we're also going to append at the end the posts array that we get back.
So it's the old one and the new one you put together in a new state.
Yes. And the reason for that, and I'm going to do that right now, is here we're going to map over that. And this is where it was important for us earlier to set this post content as a JSX component, as opposed to an Astro component, because we want it to be exactly the same in HTML and in this React component. So a few things happening here. We are looping through the posts array, which is set via set posts, and will be nothing if it doesn't exist, right? If it's a blank array. We're going to take that post. We're going to grab the cursor of the post as the key, because React for a list wants everything to have keys. And then we're going to have the post.post for each of those. So in theory, I save this, come back over here, click get more. Something's gone wrong. Sure.
Console it. Console log. We're good. Oh, that's a 404, I think.
Failed to load. Oh, you know what? I know exactly. We haven't actually put this together properly on the index page. We only have client visible. We need to pass it the props that we need, right?
Yes, of course.
So a few of the props we need the page size, I think we called it. Hold on. Let's put these side by side real fast. All right. So we need page size. Where's my, here we go.
There we go.
No, size. Size is equal to page size, which is a variable that we set earlier. And again, that's why I set it as a variable so we could use it in both places. We need the current cursor, which we're getting from page info. Where are we? Sorry, I'm just making sure.
Page.page info.
Yep, page.page info. And that is going to be the end cursor on that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that's going to set it so that we can get everything after that. And then we also need that endpoint, right? So endpoint as a prop is going to be process. Nope, not process.env. What is it in V? It's let's just go copy it so we don't mess that part up.
Yeah, this one, the whole
import thing. Meta endpoint. And again, there's lots of abstracting that could happen here. We could make this much cleaner. But we passed that in. And again, this is where we get into it, right? If I didn't pass this in, the React component actually wouldn't have it available because of the way that things build.
Exactly.
So
this is
now,
where it's
there. Okay. We have some errors, but that's fine, right? It actually went and fetched it, and then post content.
Somehow post content is not defined. What is
because I didn't define it, Tim. I absolutely did not define it.
There you go.
Import post content. Do you know where it is?
That's your component, of course.
Yeah. From, let's see, components, post content.
There we go.
Yep. Always import. So here's those. Here's these. And now we're getting an error because we don't know to stop, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that's
because when you click again now, it might not work anymore. Because
you can see it's actually repeating too. Because things get confused at the point that
because the same key. And so it doesn't know what the hydration and all that stuff is complicated now.
Yep. So we need to do a few things with our other set functions, right? Because we're not updating the cursor. It's actually pulling the same information every single time, which is a problem. So I'm going to use a couple new set methods, right? Set cursor and set has next, which are two things we set up here, right?
Yep.
We need the set cursor to be the page info end cursor of the new things that we got. And we need the next to be the has next page of the new page that we got. So we save this. I check my cheat sheet just to make sure that I have everything I need, which I believe that I do now. We just do a full refresh on the page just to double check. Get
Yeah.
more, 4, 3, 2, get more,
And now
1,
what?
and no more
There we
get more
go.
button.
Nice.
So real fast, just to make everything a little bit better, let's get rid of that H1. And Tim, we are done.
55, 56 minutes is perfect.
And just to kind of show this functionality and why that setting a few of those things made sense, let's set our page size to 1. And 1.
Exactly.
And let's go through again. 7, 6, 5.
Nice.
4, 3, 2, 1. None.
Great.
So all of that via the power of the islands architecture. None of these were loaded in until the user wanted them, right? The user needed to want them. So yeah, that is not, I'm not say simply pagination, right? Pagination is never like super simple when you have all these concerns to think about, but it is definitely with the connection specification, with islands architecture, it is what we want when we want it.
Exactly. And what I kind of like about this is the fact that you made a little island only of the load more button. However, that also gave it some form of complexity because you had to render the first stuff, but it's just HTML. And you cannot reuse that rendering thing anymore. You have to then render in a new chunk that's just below the load more button. So to me, my brain was a little like, oh, where are we going with this? But
And
that's
the fun
just
thing, right, is that originally, our post looked like this, and theoretically, right, I should be able to like easily. But if there were classes on this, I'm moving it to JSX and everything. Like Astro lets class equals work, JSX can't, and so it's class name. So you have to do all that translation work.
Yeah. So I don't know, when I'm my brain thinks in Vue and Nuxt, right? And so when I see this, let's say I'm in Nuxt and I'm not in Astro with like putting on the island and stuff.
Yep.
This could be so much simpler though. But that's interesting to see because this is just as good. It just takes a few more steps, but it's also really easy to reuse again.
Yeah.
Like
and in theory, right, I wouldn't have to use islands architecture for this. I could write vanilla JavaScript to do all of it. But the amount of regular JavaScript to do it,
you could have done that, but then you have to rendering and like the one thing I love that Nuxt has that probably React has it too, but I'm not sure. Next, they have rather than use state, you can also use something like called use async data. And so that in using async data, this is a hook in which I'm going to do something async. But whatever comes out of those or out of that function, like the set state thing you just had, like the post and set posts, from that you get, because it's an async action that you do, you have a success or a data property, a fetching property. So if it's loading or not, an error property, but also a refresh property. So what you can do, it has a cache key of what you have currently. And then when something changes, you can change the parameters and just hit refresh. And it refreshes the whole tree below that, just when you can say what it is. And so you could write this with one of those functions and a little post renderer and a use more button where you just click and it just bubbles up and says, refresh this query. It's I don't know, 20 lines. But the big difference here, and this is what I should stress, even though I'm a fanboy, it is doing lots of black magic. And that's the big thing. If something goes wrong, you're going to have a hard time. Like, ask the Nuxt creators, which I do all the time, and they're lovely. They always help. But there's lots of magic there for DX purposes. The thing is, in this, you are so open, you know exactly what's going on. And this is
you
much
move into the framework that you want to work with too, which is nice.
So there's just good things in all sizes, all shapes and sizes. I like it.
And I actually quite enjoy, I mean, this is messy right now, but I quite enjoy Astro templates. You can't use them like, oh, if I could write this and have it be a client side stuff, I would, because I actually really
Yeah.
enjoy the very firm like HTML feel of Astro's templates.
Yeah,
But
I'm
you
good
can't
with
use
that.
them for client side.
Yeah. No, but it forces people. What I love about the island thing is that you actually have to think about the fact this is going to be an island. I'm going to add some client side here, rather than what we used to have previously with Next.js and Gatsby and stuff, where it just automatically hydrated everything all the time. So much extra bundle size, so much stuff that you don't even think about, right? And in here, you're kind of forced to think about it, which is great. So you're adding some stuff here, I see, on the screen. So we have this. This is a YouTube video that we have on our YouTube channel that you can actually go to and see this in much more detail,
And there's
right? And like
also, I'm adding this right
step by
now.
step.
So this is one style of pagination, right? This is like this load more functionality. And this is actually what you see in so many tutorials across the web nowadays. However, it is not the only style of pagination. And our
Oh
lovely
yeah,
coworker
true.
Lo, who's in chat, they wrote
Yeah,
a great post on doing pagination in the traditional sense, in Next, which actually, when we paired a little bit on it, we couldn't find like this style of information on using Next. Like every
Oh,
every
really?
pagination article on Next was load more functionality, and like this
Yeah,
idea of like having like the buttons at the bottom of a page and like having page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of the stuff that you would get from like a traditional maybe e-commerce feel. Uh, couldn't find information on it. You see here
oh,
1, 2,
wow.
3, next, previous, all that. Um, like, because we were trying to figure, like there were a couple like hiccups as we were trying to figure it out. No information available. Like it was ridiculous. And so they put together a really great article on it. It is both a continuation of a series, but also just a good standalone. How do you do pagination in Next?
Yeah,
Which
and
apparently
next GraphQL combined with pagination. That's an interesting one. So, Brian, we did this in an hour,
we
and you
did.
showed a lot actually. Like this was great. So I want to thank you for your time, and
Yeah.
I think it's time for some CTAs now, isn't it?
CTAs are always fun, aren't they?
So I'll do the first. You can do another. Let's see if you feel like it though. So
Sure.
this is the first. So we have a really really lovely community, and we love how many people are in there, how often people ask questions. We have all these things like a little get started channel where you can just, without the pressure of thousands of people, ask any question you have. And so if you're trying out all this stuff in Hygraph and you're trying to figure out your next GS or your Astro, please just join us on Slack at hygraph.com and just ask your questions.
I
That's
will
mine.
I will pause CTOs real fast because I actually really enjoyed this comment from Louise, right? An
Oh, how
interesting
about it?
step up challenge would be to dynamically change the size of pages based on how many can fit in the viewport. You absolutely could do something
Fancy.
that would break my brain a little bit to try to figure out. The first step, right? That's not just like a step up, that's a jump up. The first step would
Yeah.
be, can we dynamically change the size with a drop down on the page? Absolutely. That changes that
Yeah, that's
variable.
easier. Yeah.
Figuring out the sizing of everything, you absolutely could do, but it's a little bit more than a step up, but a really cool idea. I
Oh,
like that a lot,
we could
especially in the micro
definitely.
blog.
I honestly, Luis, is this a next stream? Let's keep that in mind. I love this idea. It's quite hacky though, but it's cool
Yeah,
because
I
you can
mean,
add another island to look at the. Oh, I'm already doing it. Okay, wait.
you can do it, Tim. That's a lot of browser JavaScript that I haven't written that style in a long time, but it's absolutely
For me,
possible.
like I've been dreaming, reading and writing with that stuff for a long time when I worked at agencies. I mean, you've been at startups a bit longer. That I've had these crazy things where it was still jQuery time, where we had to do
Sure.
all that stuff all the time. Anyways,
Yeah, pull up the next
before
CTA. I'll
just
do the
came
next
out.
CTA.
Yeah, you go for the next. I'll put it on the screen. Which one do you want?
That just surprised me.
Here we go.
Ah, yes. You might want to sign up and actually use Hygraph. App.hygraph.com/sign up is a great way of doing that. We actually have a whole bunch of starters that you can pick from. Tim wrote a great one that's an e-commerce store. Lo worked on the not Hygraph FM, which was a music streaming site, but a movie streaming site based on some of the code there. A lot of cool functionality you can play with. You can get content immediately. So yeah, definitely sign up, give it a shot, and join the Slack community that was Tim's CTA and ask questions that you've got as you find them.
Yeah, and just one thing I decided to say with this also is that our free tier is like super free. No, that's not the right
Super
word.
free. I don't know what that means.
It's super free. No, but it's also there's a lot of features you can use, like almost everything you can do with free tier. Like there's production projects I've been using, like with a lot of things in it that are all for free. And so then the last one, I'll take this one because Romina, our lovely colleague, is in the chat here, and she's been writing all the time on our docs, and we're getting it better and better. So if you have any questions, either go to the community or just you can find it in the docs. And I think we're good.
Yeah.
Any last words?
Last week it was very like, I don't know, there was like HTML, when HTML makes sense, extend it with islands. I don't know, something like that.
Okay. With that bombshell, this is it.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.